Welcome to Get Serious. So today I wanted to remark on dispositions, and I think it's almost everybody's most crucial topic when nationally we're sitting in mostly a buyer's market outside of certain pockets within the Northeast and Midwest parts of the country. But even then, real estate is hyper-local, so do your research before you buy anything. I know Seth and Neil Clements were talking about this on recent RE Tipster podcast as well too, where so much of the discussion is like, how do you dispo? How do you dispo? That's really been the common theme for, I'd say, like 2+ years at this point anyway. And, something we take a ton of pride in, as well as try to develop our strategies and tactics continuously, which is, again, take my word for what I share with a grain of salt when it comes to being incentivized to sell my own services. But yeah, as a funder, especially an equity funder, even if we're more expensive capital, we are so diligent from a value add perspective because it's our money at risk here. We have become some of the best dispo experts within the industry. And that also comes with choosing the right realtor and, making sure you're staying on top of them. Like, we are the furthest thing from dumb money as possible. I probably don't need to tell you this if you're listening to this podcast, given how much content and value we try to provide, whether you work with us or not. So hopefully that knowledge and hard-fought wisdom comes across here. But, the disposition side, I can't tell you again how much time we spend strategizing about that, because dispo problems are like the biggest alarm within the company if things are not going well, and the thing that will keep me up the most at night more than anything. So I think that's probably similar to a lot of folks' businesses. And we saw another example of a potentially larger subdivide project. And this is not the first time I've seen this, but, and this was a large play. This was like, $1 million purchase, potentially could sell for close to double that. And, probably it was a major subdivide that wouldn't necessarily need like significant planning and zoning department, like hearing approvals and so forth. So it's like, okay, what's a minor subdivide versus what's a major subdivide? And sometimes a bit of a gray area between that. I would, generally when I think of major subdivides, it's more of like an entitlement play where you're likely going to be selling paper lots to a developer or builder versus, trying to dispo all the lots on your own. So that would be, to me, more of the distinction, how I would define it. But plenty of argument can be made there. So, we're just going to consider it a minor subdivide where we might be doing, 15 to 20 child parcel lots that could easily be considered a major, but we would, dispo them on our own. And, in this particular area, there was a realtor who was very familiar, very bullish on the project. I mean, of course, most realtors are, right? And there was another like very well-established local, land flipper, land developer, kind of one and the same, that, had a decades-long track record of, buying up larger acreage and, splitting off the child parcels, dispoing them. And they had just done like a 400-acre project recently and, sold them off very quickly. And but none of those were on market as far as I could see. Like it was a full off market channel. And when I looked at the underlying data for the market, like it was not as encouraging. Like it was an active market, but from a price per acre perspective, no surprise, right? Given how conservative we are, but the data was not as encouraging to me from, if we're going to introduce like 15 plus child parcels and go after $1 million project, like I want to make sure we are fully locked in and have enough margin to account for like pretty much any downside scenario to make it worth that chunk of change if we're going to put that amount of capital to work in a macro like this, a macro and a micro. And I just wasn't seeing it. Like the numbers weren't, the price per acre I was thinking was not quite half of what was, what the realtor and the land investor were thinking, but, it was off by probably 30%-ish conservatively. Like, so it really made it much tighter margins. And so, but they were, remarking, hey, like, look, these, this local group, they sold like 400 acres, lickety split. And like, their design of the child parcels wasn't even that great. But, critically is like that it's an apples and oranges thing, because again, it comes back to the dispo channels. Like, regardless of how these guys were designing their child parcels, sure, it could have been better, but their off-market channels were just excellent. Like, they had dedicated websites specific to each project. I mean, beautiful 4K videos, very friendly salesmen, like walking through the various lots. And they had like multiple financing different options to consider purchasing the properties. Like, really, really solid marketing. They were doing mass cold texts to kind of anybody in the area. They probably had a very extensive existing buyers list. Again, they've been operating in the area for like 40 some odd years, and that is really difficult to replicate. So again, this is not the first time I've seen this. We also looked at another project in Tennessee where it was kind of like a similar thing where, it might have been close to like $1 million project. And they're like the on-market listings, like it wasn't as encouraging. But then, the land investor who brought us is like, yeah, hey, there's this one company that just like sold off all their lots. But again, they had like a very extensive out-of-state buyers market who were just routinely scooping these things up at significant premiums for anything moving on market, and generally like faster as well too. So it's just like, when you see avenues like that, unless you are operating a similar off-market dispo channel that takes it and have both the staff as well as the overhead to account for all those dispo related, like that's expensive to do all these mass cold texts and so forth, and manage the staff to move this property, or even have like on-site visits, being local to the area and bringing people out, and kind of having like a party on the property to get people to sign contracts. Like, that can work very well, but it's, again, very difficult to replicate, and where you can't use that as a realistic example of how to anticipate the subject project from going when you're hitting the market, especially if you're thinking about utilizing a realtor and going on market, because the on market data is different from what this other specialized company is able to get through off-market channels. And very, very few land investors, I would say like less than 1%, actually have like a super solid off-market channel, particularly locally. If they work in an area, I know some folks have set it up and you're just going to get different results like that. But, most folks do not have that set up. And so like, it's a fool's errand to think that you can replicate those results without having the infrastructure built in. Like, I look at the price per acres that these off markets are getting. You can't compare it to the on market unless you can do exactly what those folks are doing. So I get why it's so attractive. You're like, oh my gosh, they just sold 20 plus child parcels in like 2 months, but then everyone else operating in that area is not having those results. You can't be looking through rose-tinted glasses like that. It's just, that's far too optimistic, especially again in this macro and micro, where the downside just has to be considered first and foremost. Like, there's a reason why we're so cash liquid, and can routinely move our property so quickly, because of how conservative we are, and we consider the downside versus the upside. Like, this is not a bull market. Even in a bull market, you're better off served considering the downside anyway, but especially in a market like this. Just wanted to share that nugget, that not all dispo channels are created equal. Not all companies that sell land in an area are created equal. Apples and oranges, folks. Like, you gotta consider the particulars. The data speaks louder than anything else. Don't let yourself get fooled. With that in mind, seriousland.capital for any of your funding needs. DK minimum purchase price, land due diligence Facebook group for review of your land deals. Subscribe and share, everybody. Take care. Looking forward to talking to you next time. Bye.